The cold bit differently here. Along the Chicago riverfront, it wasn't the honest, straightforward chill of the lower Calumet alleys I called home. This was a wealthy cold, a glittering, indifferent cold that whipped off the half-frozen river and scoured the pristine glass of the Northline Crown. Snowflakes, thin and sharp as bits of shaved ice, swirled in the amber glow of the parking lot lamps, dusting the hoods of cars that cost more than my entire education. My own breath plumed in front of me, a temporary ghost in the Arctic air. My last delivery of the night, a single bag of lukewarm tacos for someone in a penthouse who probably wouldn't tip. The engine of my beat-up sedan coughed a final, rattling sigh as I killed it, the silence that followed amplifying the tired ache in my bones. 28 years old. By day, I was Mai Luong, lab technician at Orleans Laboratory, a woman of science and precision. By night, I was just Mai, a gig worker hustling to keep my head above the icy water of student loans and visa renewal fees, the scent of antiseptic gloves replaced by the lingering smell of other people's dinners. The problem was a cherry red convertible, parked with arrogant carelessness directly in the fire lane, its tail end blocking the access ramp. A group of 4, 2 men and 2 women, spilled out of the building's gleaming lobby, their laughter loud and brittle in the quiet lot. They reeked of expensive liquor and entitlement. I zipped up my thin jacket, the fabric doing little against the wind. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I wanted. They turned, a slow, collective pivot, the man holding the car keys, a blonde with a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled for a magazine cover, gave me a lazy, dismissive once-over. "You need to move your car," I said, pointing to the bold red letters on the pavement. "This is a fire lane." My accent, the one I spent hours trying to sand down with pronunciation apps and public television, felt thick and clumsy on my tongue. It was a ghost of my mother's voice, a map of a home I hadn't seen in a decade. One of the women, draped in a coat that was probably real fur, giggled into her hand. "Listen to that," she slurred. "It's so cute." The blond man smirked. "What was that? Honey Fire Lane?" He pronounced the word slowly, obnoxiously, as if I were a child. Heat crawled up my neck, a shameful, angry blush. I kept my voice even. "Yes, it is for emergencies. You cannot park here." "Oh, Miss Broken English is giving us orders," the other man chimed in, stepping forward. He was bigger, with a brutish face. "You know, this is America, sweetie. We park where we want." I bit the inside of my cheek, the metallic tang of blood a small, sharp anchor in the rising tide of humiliation. My hands, shoved deep in my pockets, curled into fists. I had practiced this 1,000 times in front of the mirror, the calm expression, the steady gaze, the refusal to let them see they'd landed a blow. I was a professional. I was logical. I would not let them crack me. "Just move the car, please," I repeated, my voice tight. "It's the law." That's when the world went silent. A car had appeared behind me. It hadn't made a sound, not a crunch of snow, not a whisper of an engine. It was a black sedan, so polished it seemed to drink the light, reflecting the falling snow as distorted streaks. There was no license plate. It was a void, a piece of the night that had detached itself and glided to a stop. The tinted rear window slid down with a faint, electric hum. A man sat inside, his face partially obscured by shadow, the cold air from outside steaming around the opening. He wasn't looking at the drunken group. His eyes were fixed on me. They were dark, steady, and held a stillness that was more unnerving than any threat. He was about 35, with a severe haircut and the kind of tailored overcoat that bespoke quiet, immense power. He didn't speak. He simply lifted a hand and pointed a single elegant finger toward the passenger side of his car. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. The group in front of me fell silent, their drunken bravado evaporating. They stared at the car, then at the man, then back at me, a new, confused apprehension dawning in their eyes. The man's gaze didn't waver. He opened his door from the inside and stepped out. He moved with an unnerving grace, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the snow-dusted asphalt. The driver's door opened simultaneously, and another man, broad-shouldered and watchful, emerged, his eyes scanning the entire parking lot in a single, professional sweep. "You don't need to prove anything to them," the first man said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that cut through the cold air. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed. He walked to the rear door of the sedan and opened it for me, an invitation, an extraction. The big one, the one who'd called me sweetie, seemed to recover a sliver of his courage. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was pure stupidity. He took a step toward me, a sneer twisting his lips. "What, is this your pimp?" he grunted, and then he did it. He hawked and spat, a gob of saliva landing directly on the toe of my worn-out boot. I froze, the indignity of it a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but before I could even process the violation, a shadow fell over the man's face. The man from the car, Silas, I would learn his name had moved between us. He hadn't rushed, he had simply arrived. He didn't touch the guy. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, his presence sucking all the oxygen from the air around him. "The fire lane," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying with absolute clarity, "is to save your mother's life, not for your cheap car to park." The man's face went pale. The insult about his car, an afterthought, seemed to hit him harder than any physical threat could have. He looked down at Silas's immaculate shoes, then at his own spit on my boot, and he visibly shrank. Just then, the security gate to the North Line Crown slid open with a buzz, and a patrol car from the Metropolitan Vice and Ports Commission rolled past, its headlights sweeping across the tense tableau. Silas didn't even glance at it. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to his driver, Evan Rook, who was already behind the wheel. Silas held the door for me, his eyes never leaving mine. I didn't know what else to do. I got in. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing out the world. The car pulled away from the curb in a smooth, silent arc, leaving the group of residents standing there, suddenly small and sobered under the unforgiving lights. The interior of the car was a sanctuary of quiet warmth. It smelled of cold, expensive leather, and a faint, spicy scent of cinnamon. I clutched my frayed delivery backpack on my lap like a shield, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was in a car with no plates, driven by a man who radiated danger, and I had no idea why. Why would a man like that intervene for a delivery driver being harassed in a parking lot? He didn't speak for several blocks, letting the city lights slide over the tinted windows. I stared out at the blur of traffic, the swirling snow. "You work at Orleans Laboratory," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "You filed your H-1B visa extension application 17 days ago." A jolt of pure ice shot through my veins. I turned to look at him fully for the first time. In the dim light of the cabin, I could see his features more clearly, a strong, angular jaw, a straight nose, eyes that missed nothing. He knew my name. He knew where I worked. He knew my immigration status. "I'm not threatening you," he said, as if reading my mind. His calmness was the most threatening thing of all. "I'm offering you a temporary job." My phone, resting on my knee, buzzed. I glanced down, a text from an unknown number. "Talk less if you don't want the City Integrity Unit checking your papers." My blood ran cold. The CIU, they were the city's internal affairs, notorious for their ruthless investigations. But they also had a reputation for being used as a political weapon, for making problems and people disappear under mountains of bureaucratic scrutiny. I looked from the phone back to the man beside me. Was this his message? A two-pronged attack of fear and false salvation. He seemed to notice the shift in my expression. He reached into the inner pocket of his overcoat and produced a business card. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, completely blank except for a phone number embossed in stark black lettering. No name, no company, no logo. "When they mock your voice again," he said, placing the card on the seat between us, "call me." My survival instincts, honed by years of navigating a new country alone, screamed at me. This was a trap. This was a world I wanted no part of. "I don't want a job," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "and I don't need your help. Please, just let me out here." He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded to his driver. The car slowed and pulled over on the Halberd Bridge. The wind howled outside, rattling the steel structure. Through the window, I could see the city lights reflecting off the dark, ice-choked river below, the falling snow looking like salt sprinkled over a vast, frozen wound. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the card, my backpack, and pushed the door open. Desperate for the cleansing bite of the cold air, I needed to be out of that car, away from its suffocating quiet and its dangerous occupant. I stepped onto the sidewalk and slammed the door shut. As I turned to hurry away, his window slid down again. "People attack what they think is weak," Silas Arguello said, his voice quiet but carrying over the wind. "You're not weak. They just haven't paid the price yet." Then the window slid up, and the black sedan disappeared into the snowy Chicago night, leaving me alone on the bridge, the blank business card cold in my hand, and his words echoing in my mind like a prophecy. The Halberd Bridge felt a world away. Back in my apartment in Lower Calumet, the city's opulent gleam was replaced by the honest grit of industry. The air didn't smell of clean, cold water, but of steel and soot and the distant savory scent of the local Polish bakeries. The only river here was a sluggish canal, and the soundtrack wasn't the lonely howl of the wind, but the rhythmic, earth-shaking rumble of the L train passing a block away. This was my reality, a third-floor walk-up I shared with Kathy Torres, an ER nurse whose exhaustion was a constant, humming presence in our small space. My side of the room was a testament to meticulous anxiety. Tacked to the wall was a large desk calendar, its squares filled with my cramped, precise handwriting. Electric $47.50, groceries $89.20, Visa renewal fee, final installment $250. Every penny was a soldier sent into battle, and I was the weary general counting my losses. The blank business card Silas Arguello had given me sat on my nightstand. A stark, cream-colored accusation. I'd told myself I would throw it out. It was a relic from a brief, surreal detour into a world that wasn't mine. But I hadn't. It felt too heavy to simply discard. The next day at the lab was a blur of forced normalcy. I ran diagnostics, logged sample data, and calibrated centrifuges, the methodical nature of the work a balm on my frayed nerves. I tried to convince myself that last night was nothing more than an ugly, random encounter, rich drunks being cruel, a strange man playing savior for his own unknowable reasons. It had nothing to do with me. The illusion shattered when I got home that evening. Kathy was already gone for her night shift, leaving the apartment steeped in a quiet that felt more menacing than peaceful. I sat down at our small kitchen table, my laptop humming to life. And there it was, an email with a subject line that made my stomach clench. From Bureau of Proscribed Commerce, Regional Compliance Division subject, Urgent Chain of Custody Inquiry, Orleans Laboratory, File BPC 7741C. My hands went cold. I clicked it open. The text was dense with bureaucratic language, but the message was terrifyingly clear. Pursuant to a preliminary compliance audit, your laboratory has been identified as the receiving entity for a shipment of biological samples originating from Hallow Pier, currently flagged under a restricted transit advisory. Please be prepared to provide all relevant documentation, including Form 88C Receiving Officer's Signature Log, for immediate review. Form 88C, Receiving Officer's Signature Log, my signature. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. Just yesterday afternoon, a delivery driver, hurried and impatient, had dropped off a large, insulated crate. It was a routine shipment of tissue cultures, or so I'd thought. I had scribbled my signature on his electronic pad without a second thought, my mind already on the evening's delivery route. Hallow Pier. The words on the screen seemed to pulse. I closed my eyes, trying to reconstruct the moment. The crate. There was something odd about it. On the lid, scrawled in smudged blue ink, was a handwritten note. It was in Vietnamese, but it was messy. The spelling phonetic and strange. It was the way my grandmother wrote, a dialect from the coastal fishing villages near Vam Tui, a place where the language was shaped by the sea and the sun. It was a dialect you'd only hear among the Vietnamese fishing communities along the Gulf Coast. Men and women who had brought their old ways to new shores. It was completely out of place on a medical shipment in Chicago. My heart began to beat a frantic, panicked rhythm. I fumbled for my phone, scrolling through my audio files, a habit I'd picked up out of caution when dealing with unfamiliar couriers or strange deliveries. I'd often discreetly start a voice memo. It was a small, paranoid measure, a just in case that had never, until now, been necessary. I found the file from yesterday. I pressed play. The recording was tinny, filled with the ambient noise of the lab's reception area. I could hear my own voice, polite and professional, confirming the delivery address, then the driver's. He had stepped away from the desk to take a call. His voice was a low mumble, a rough, broken pidgin that was a jarring mix of Spanish, English, and that same coastal Vietnamese dialect. "I'll get it to the warehouse. No, the sleeping shark goes later." I leaned closer, straining to hear over the static. My time teaching English as a second language at the local church had exposed me to dozens of fractured dialects. I could pick out words, piece together fragments of meaning others would miss. MVPC sniffs around, but the shift change is the key. Tell him the cargo is clean for now. Sleeping shark, it was slang. But for what? It sounded like something a fisherman would say. My mind raced, trying to connect the pieces. A restricted shipment, a strange dialect, a coded conversation. Another buzz from my phone, a text message. My breath hitched. It was the same unknown number from last night. The message contained a single image. It was a photo of me, taken last night in the Northline Crown parking lot. It was grainy, shot from a distance, but it was unmistakably me, standing in front of the cherry red convertible. My face tight with anger and humiliation. The angle was from an upper-story window. Someone had been watching the entire exchange. Beneath the photo, a line of text. The crate and the recording, get rid of them. Or this picture goes to the CIU with a story about an immigrant collaborator. I felt the room tilt. This wasn't a coincidence. The harassment in the parking lot, Silas Arguello's sudden appearance, the anonymous warning, and now this email from a federal bureau, it was all connected. I was being squeezed, pushed into a corner from all sides. They weren't just threatening my visa anymore. They were threatening to frame me, to turn me into a criminal. When Kathy came home in the morning, her face pale with exhaustion, she found me sitting in the exact same spot, staring at the wall. I told her everything. Her nurse's composure took over, her voice calm and steady as she made me a cup of tea. "You have to go to the police. She said, her brow furrowed with worry. "This is witness intimidation. It's a serious crime." "And say what?" I shot back, my voice raw. "That I, a foreign national with a pending visa extension, have a recording of a suspicious conversation I probably shouldn't have made. About a federal investigation I'm now tangled in Kathy. One wrong word, one skeptical officer, and my file gets flagged. A misunderstanding could keep me in administrative limbo for years. I could lose everything." She couldn't argue with that. She knew the tightrope I walked every day. She turned on the small television on our counter, the morning news a mundane distraction. A blandly handsome anchor was rattling off the city's headlines. And in local news, sources within the Metropolitan Vice and Ports Commission confirm they are planning a series of raids at Hallow Pier, targeting illegal cargo operations. The investigation is rumored to focus on Warehouse 47 an import-export facility allegedly controlled by associates of reputed mob figure Cortez Barraza. The name Barraza meant nothing to me, but the other two words hit me like a physical shock. Warehouse 47. I scrambled for my bag, pulling out the copy of the shipping manifest from yesterday. There it was, in small print under the sender's address. Origin scan, Hallow Pier, WH47. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. The BPC email, the raid, the restricted biosamples. If the MVPC raided that warehouse and found a crate of sensitive biological materials in the middle of a mob-run facility, they wouldn't ask questions. They would assume it was part of the illegal operation. And the paper trail, my signature, would lead them straight back to Orleans Laboratory, to me. Worse, if the raid was clumsy, if those samples were compromised, a public health disaster, my carefully constructed life was crumbling. Calling the police was a risk. Doing nothing was a bigger one. There was only one other option. The blank business card on my nightstand, a path into the darkness. But as Silas Arguello had said, maybe a safer one. My finger trembled as I dialed the number. It didn't even ring a full time before he answered. Yes, his voice was exactly as I remembered it, calm, deep, and utterly in control. I swallowed hard. This is Mai Luong. A pause. I know. I might have a problem. I know that too, he said. Are you ready to discuss that job? I don't want to owe you anything, I said, the words a weak protest. There was a soft sound on the other end of the line, almost a sigh. Miss Luong, he said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. Right now, you owe yourself a safer path. The one you're on is collapsing. He was right. I was out of options. We agreed to meet, not in an office, not in a coffee shop, but at a place of his choosing, a decommissioned chapel on the industrial outskirts, a place called Our Lady of the Switchyard. The name itself felt like an omen. As I drove my sputtering sedan through the gray, frozen streets of Lower Calumet, I kept checking my rearview mirror. A dark green SUV, a model I didn't recognize, had been behind me for the last 10 blocks. It kept a respectable distance, never getting too close, but it was always there. Paranoia, I told myself. It's just traffic. But my instincts, the ones that had kept me safe for so long, were screaming. On impulse, I made a sharp, unsignaled right turn, bumping over a set of rusted, abandoned railroad tracks. It was a shortcut I used for deliveries, a road most people avoided. I glanced in the mirror again. The SUV didn't follow. It continued straight, disappearing from view. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The vehicle was gone, but the feeling of being watched, of being a pawn in a game I didn't understand, remained. It was a cold, heavy presence, like a hand pressed against the back of my neck. I was driving to a meeting with one dangerous man, and I was certain that another was already hunting me. Our Lady of the Switchyard wasn't a church anymore. It was a brick mausoleum for forgotten prayers, huddled in the shadow of the elevated tracks. The air inside was colder than the street, smelling of damp plaster, old incense, and the sharp, metallic tang of ozone from active electronics. The meeting was not just Silas Arguello. Evan Rook, the man whose silence in the car had been its own kind of presence, stood by the boarded-up doorway. He wasn't guarding the door so much as he was part of it, a seamless extension of the shadows. In the center of the nave, where the altar should have been Dean, a bank of laptops cast a pale blue light on the peeling frescoes. A third person, younger, with a shock of dark hair and a focused energy, sat before the screens. Silas himself was standing over a massive, unrolled schematic of the Chicago ports, spread across the remaining pews. He didn't greet me, but his eyes lifted, acknowledging my arrival. The look was intense, appraising. "This is Rowan Ibarra," he said, gesturing to the man at the laptops. "We call him Patch. He handles data. You've met Evan." Patch didn't turn, but his fingers paused on the keyboard. "Heard the audio you sent. It's a mess. The file is corrupted at the source." It's not corrupted, I said, my voice sounding too loud in the cavernous space. I stepped forward into the circle of laptop light. That's just how they talk. It's a pidgin. Vietnamese, Spanish, and port slang. Silas moved from the map, his attention now entirely on me. You sent the file. You held back the translation. I held back my analysis. I corrected him, pulling my phone from my pocket. My hands were shaking, but I forced them steady. I wanted to do it in person. I didn't want any more misunderstandings. I had spent the drive over listening to the 30-second clip 100 times. I played it now, the tinny, garbled voice echoing strangely off the statues of saints who watched us with chipped, indifferent eyes. Nai, nu, no. The sleeping shark goes to warehouse. Denen. Test the pressure. MVPC is blind. Changeover is clean. Taungu. I translated, my voice precise. It means sleeping boat. But he corrects himself. He says sleeping shark. Kamapungu. It's slang. I used to hear it from the Gulf fishermen who came to the ESL classes. It's what they called the old oxygen compressors on their boats. The ones they used for deep water traps. They were loud, unreliable, and looked like a shark's head. Patch had stopped typing. He was listening. He mentions pressure and warehouse, I continued, the pieces locking together in my own mind as I said them. This isn't narcotics. Mr. Arguello. They're moving medical equipment, and they're modifying it. Silas's expression didn't change, but a new, cold light entered his eyes. He understood. He looked at Patch. Barraza has a holding company, Aldora Medical Supply, registered 3 months ago. They're not just modifying them, I said, the full, sickening weight of it landing on me. That driver was talking about Hallow Pier, Warehouse 47. My lab received a crate of biological samples from there yesterday. That dialect. It's a closed community. They wouldn't use it on a legitimate shipment. They're using the biosample crates to hide the real cargo. They're swapping the contents. Silas finished the thought, his voice flat, and sending the real equipment, the functional compressors, to a black market. The ones left in the crates, the sleeping sharks. They're faulty, I whispered. Junk, repainted to look new. They're being sent out to a network of low-income clinics, patients who need pure, pressurized oxygen. They'll get a tainted supply. They'll get intermittent pressure. It could cause respiratory failure. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. Evan Rook had turned from the door, his face a mask of stone. Patch let out a low whistle. The Bureau of Proscribed Commerce, as Silas said, turning back to me, is not a random audit. They were tipped off. They will come to Orleans Laboratory. They will check the chain of custody. And they will find your signature, Miss Luong, on a shipment that is now linked to a public health crisis and Cortez Barraza's illegal operation. You won't be a witness. You'll be the designated scapegoat. My stomach turned to ice. He was laying my entire future out on a mortuary slab, the anonymous texts, the BPC email. It was all designed to pin this on me. I need to hire a lawyer, I stammered, my mind grasping for the procedures I'd memorized from immigration websites. You need more than a lawyer, Silas countered. You need this to go away, and for that, I need you. He stepped closer. Didn't invade my space, but his presence was consuming. I am offering you a job. 72 hours, you will be my ears, my voice, and my eyes inside a community my people cannot touch. This slang, this dialect, you understand. It's a key. Barraza is using it to build his operation, believing no one is listening. You will listen. And what? I challenged him, my fear hardening into anger. You'll have Evan. Silence them. I saw you in that parking lot. I saw how he moves. Evan's eyes flicked to mine, but he said nothing. My business has rules, Miss Luong, Silas said, his voice level. We do not generate chaos. We manage it. What Barraza is doing endangering civilians, the sick, that is chaos. It's bad for the city. It's bad for my business. I have one condition, I said, my voice shaking but firm. I won't be party to hurting anyone. No innocent people, no collateral damage. If I see it, if I even sense it, I walk. I'll take my chances with the BPC. I expected him to argue, to intimidate, to dismiss me. Instead, he looked at Evan, then at Patch, then back at me. He nodded. Agreed, in front of my team. No harm will come to any civilian on your word. The speed of his agreement was almost as disorienting as a threat. He turned to the map. The tempo in the room shifted. It was no longer a negotiation. It was a briefing. Barris Nova's front is the Aldora container yard, Silas said, tapping a red circled area on the schematic. They move the equipment through there, disguised as scrap metal. You're going in. How? I asked. I can't just walk in. You can, Patch said, finally turning to face me. His eyes were bright, intelligent. You're going to be a day laborer looking for cash work. You're from a Gulfport family. Just moved up, trying to send money home. Your accent, he said, not unkindly, is your cover letter. It makes you invisible and authentic at the same time. While you're inside, Silas continued, we handle the other problem, your visa. He slid a piece of paper across the pew. Astor and Pike. They're the best civil and immigration firm in the city. A retainer has been paid. They will file an immediate injunction against any BPC or CIU inquiry, citing potential bureaucratic harassment of a foreign national. It will wall you off. Astor and Pike. I knew the name. Their offices were in the most expensive towers downtown. Relief. So sharp and sudden it made me dizzy. Flooded my system, a legal shield. I wouldn't be fighting this alone. I didn't know then that Pike was a name that would come back to haunt me, that this shield was part of a larger, dirtier game. Right then, it just felt like breathing. Silas pushed a small, slim-line phone across the wood. This is yours. It's encrypted. No GPS, no tracker. It only calls 2 numbers, mine and Patch's. It needs a passcode, a spoken one, something you'll remember. I thought for a moment, my mind going back to my childhood, to the poems my mother made me memorize. I chose a line from an old, sad poem about loyalty and home. I spoke the Vietnamese words softly into the receiver. Silas watched me, his expression unreadable, and then, in a low, quiet voice, he repeated the line. His pronunciation was perfect, not just accurate, but perfect. He had the tones, the cadence, the soft, breathy stop of the final consonant. It was the accent of a native speaker. My heart didn't just stop. It felt like it seized in my chest. This man, this American mob boss, spoke my language, not the broken pidgin of the ports, but the clean, educated language of my parents. He had listened to me, truly listened, and mirrored me perfectly. It was the most intimate, terrifying thing I had ever experienced. I snapped my head up, my eyes wide, and he just looked back, holding my gaze, offering no explanation. We trained, Tar, he said, breaking the spell. He turned to Evan. Signals. For the next 20 minutes, they drilled me. These were not the clumsy signals of a movie. They were soft signals. Evan called them. Actions so normal they were invisible. If I saw men I recognized as Barraza's security, I would brush my left sleeve, as if checking a watch. If I saw anyone who looked like undercover MVPC or federal agents, I would adjust the strap of my future backpack. Simple. Deniable. The meeting was over. The plan was set. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to take a step into the void. As I turned to leave, Silas's voice stopped me. Miss Luong. I faced him. The laptop light cast his face in harsh angles. You said people mock your voice. I stiffened. The memory of the parking lot, the sting of misbroken English, still fresh. Yes. When? He asked. At what moments do they laugh? I thought about it. The parking lot. The time I tried to correct a professor in college, the time I argued about a mistaken bill. The answer was clear. When I have the most reason to be right, I said. A smile, thin as a razor's edge, touched the corner of his mouth. Good, he said. Tomorrow you'll have a lot of right reasons. I walked out of the chapel, Evan Rook a silent shadow behind me. As I reached my car, parked in the alley, a sudden glare swept across the cracked facade of the church. A vehicle, turning at the end of the street, its high beams cutting through the darkness. The light caught the stained glass window of the Virgin Mary, illuminating her in a halo of garish green and red for a split second. It was a dark green SUV, the same one that had followed me here. Before I could even process the fear, Evan's hand was on my arm. "Not your car," he said, his voice a low growl. He steered me past my sedan to the black car waiting in the deeper shadows, Silas's car. Silas himself was already exiting the chapel's side door, moving with that same liquid speed. He got into the driver's seat. Evan opened the back for me. "They know we met," I whispered as the door shut. "They know where we met," Silas corrected me, his eyes on the rearview mirror as he pulled the car into a silent, unlit U-turn, heading the opposite way. "It just means we're accelerating the timeline." The Aldora container yard was a symphony of industrial violence. The shriek of grinding metal, the percussive slam of shipping containers, and the mournful bellow of a distant foghorn created a wall of sound so thick you could feel it in your teeth. The air was heavy with the smell of diesel exhaust, rust, and the salty, damp breath of the canal. Compared to the sterile, controlled silence of Orleans Laboratory, it was a different planet. This was a place of raw, sweaty, blue-collar labor, a world where you were measured not by your intellect, but by the strength of your back and your ability to become invisible. I wore a high-visibility vest that felt like a target, and in my hand was a folded piece of paper, a work referral forged by Patch. It was a masterpiece of mundane deception, complete with a fake company letterhead and a coffee stain that looked years old. I was no longer Mai Luang scientist. I was Lien, a recent arrival from a Texas fishing town, looking for under-the-table work to send back to a family that didn't exist. The foreman's office was a cramped shack vibrating with the yard's chaotic energy. A man who looked like he'd been carved from driftwood sat behind a scarred metal desk. A faded tattoo of a carp snaked up his forearm. He was Fuck, but the nameplate on his desk just read Old Fish. He squinted at me, his eyes weathered and sharp. "You the girl from the referral?" he grunted, his voice a gravelly mix of the same coastal pigeon I'd heard on the recording. I nodded, deliberately letting my shoulders slump, making myself smaller. "Yes, sir," I said, pitching my voice to be soft, my accent purposefully thicker, leaning into the rural, uneducated cadence that Patch and I had rehearsed. "They say you might have work. I learn fast. I work hard." He grunted again, a sound that could have meant anything. He looked over my fake papers. "You talk funny. Where are you from?" "Vamtui," I said, naming a tiny village he wouldn't know. "Down south, on the water." That seemed to satisfy him. He saw a familiar type, a desperate girl from the provinces. Easy to manage, unlikely to complain, to him. My accent wasn't a flaw, it was a credential. It meant I was one of his own, part of the invisible, undocumented workforce that kept places like this running. Out in the yard, I was a ghost. The other workers, a rough mix of men from a dozen different countries, barely glanced at me. I was assigned to the simplest task, coiling loose, strapping, and sorting dunnage. A few of the younger men made jokes, mimicking my accent, calling out, "Hey, Texas," in a sing-song voice. I just smiled, a small, placid smile, and kept working. Every jeer was a confirmation that my camouflage was working. They saw what they expected to see: a timid, broken English girl who wasn't a threat. Invisibility was my armor. My target was a row of white containers at the far end of the yard, stenciled with the logo O2 Relief. They were supposed to contain medical supplies. Around midday, a flatbed truck arrived, and Old Fish yelled at me and two other workers to help check the inventory before it was loaded. Inside the container, the air was cold and still. Boxes of medical-grade oxygen regulators and valves were stacked on pallets. As the other two men started scanning barcodes, I moved toward the back, pretending to check seals. Two forklift drivers were talking nearby, their voices a low rumble beneath the yard's din. One was speaking the Vietnamese pidgin, the other, a rapid-fire, street-inflected Spanish. And make sure the route is changed out at 47 inches, the Vietnamese driver said. Root guts, insides. Sí, después del cambio de turno de MVPC. The other replied, yes, after the MVPC shift change. My blood went cold. Swapped the guts at warehouse 47 after the MVPC shift change. It was the confirmation I needed, a direct link between this yard and the faulty equipment. My training kicked in. My gaze swept the area, casual but deliberate. In the shadow of a stack of containers, a man in a dirty jacket was leaning against a wall, pretending to be on a break. He was holding a cheap burner phone, but he wasn't talking. He had it angled toward the O2 relief container, and I saw the telltale glint of his screen as he zoomed in, capturing a clear shot of the shipping labels on the boxes. He wasn't one of Barraza's men. He was too clean under the grime, too focused. He was a plant. My heart hammered against my ribs. I turned my back to him, my body shielding the motion as I reached for my backpack on the floor. With a slow, natural movement, I adjusted the shoulder strap, pulling it tighter. The signal. MVPC or feds are here. The burner phone in my pocket vibrated. It was a text from Silas's number. Pull out, now. There are rats on both sides. My fingers trembled as I typed back, my thumb clumsy on the tiny keypad. I crouched behind a pallet of boxes, shielded from view. Not yet. I need to know the water's route. The words were out before I could stop them. It was more than just defiance. The phrase water's route, duong nuoc, was an idiom from the fishing villages, meaning the true path, the hidden current. It was intimate. A piece of the language I shared with him. The phone was silent for a full 10 seconds, a small eternity. I could almost feel his surprise, his reassessment of the situation. Then, a new message. Be careful. Just then, Old Fish stomped into the container. He pointed a grimy finger at me. You, lean, you drive. He tossed a set of keys, which I fumbled to catch. Take this box of valves to warehouse 47. Drop it at the receiving dock. They're waiting for it. I looked at him, my face a mask of confusion. But my English is not so good. Security. He waved a dismissive hand. That's why it's you. Your voice sounds pitiful. They'll see a scared girl and wave you through. Less questions. The bitter irony was a stone in my throat. My supposed weakness was once again my key. I nodded meekly, picked up the heavy box, and headed for the small delivery truck. The drive to Hallow Pier was a 5-mile journey through a wasteland of warehouses and scrapyards. The whole way, a battered-looking pickup truck stayed stubbornly in my rearview mirror. It had a spiderweb crack in its passenger side mirror and a dented fender. It could have been a coincidence, but after the man with the camera phone, my paranoia was screaming. I had to be sure. I saw an opening, a narrow, unmarked road leading into a sprawling scrapyard designated on a faded sign as Yard 9. I feigned a moment of panic, as if I'd missed my turn, and swerved into the yard. Kicking up a cloud of rust-colored dust, I drove 50 yards in, then killed the engine, pretending to check the address on my phone. The pickup truck followed me in. It didn't hesitate. It rolled to a stop, blocking the only way out. 2 men got out. They weren't dressed like dock workers. They wore clean, dark jackets and moved with a purpose that had nothing to do with scrap metal. These were the men Silas's team had warned me about, a Black Swan team from the Interstate Racketeering Council. Barraza's enforcers, specialists in making problems disappear and framing their rivals. My hand flew to the burner phone, but before I could even dial, it happened. A black sedan, Silas's car, materialized from behind a mountain of crushed cars. It moved with impossible speed and silence. It didn't ram the pickup. It herded it, nudging its rear quarter panel with surgical precision, forcing it into a tight corner between a crane and a stack of shipping containers. Evan Rook was out of the driver's side before the car even stopped rolling. He moved not like a man, but like a force of nature. There were no guns, no shouting. The first IRC man turned, his hand reaching inside his jacket, but Evan was already on him. There was a blur of motion, a sickening, wet crunch. and the man crumpled to the ground. The second man tried to run, but Evan flowed around the truck, a shadow detaching itself from the greater darkness. A quick, brutal sequence of locks and holds, and the second man was on his knees, his arm bent at an impossible angle, his face a mask of agony. It was over in less than 15 seconds. It was the most terrifyingly efficient, silent and clean display of violence I had ever witnessed. I sat frozen in the delivery truck, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, a cold dread seeping into my bones. This was their world. This was the management of chaos. Evan didn't even look at me. He spoke into his wrist, then got back in the sedan and was gone, leaving two incapacitated men in the dust. Shaking, I restarted the truck and drove to warehouse 47. At the gate, just as Old Fish had predicted, the guard took one look at my nervous expression, heard my hesitant, heavily accented explanation, and waved me through with a bored sigh. Inside, the warehouse was strangely quiet. I saw immediately that half of the ceiling-mounted security cameras had their indicator lights off. They were dead. I found the receiving dock, a corner piled high with more O2 relief crates. One of them was open. I peered inside. The oxygen compressor within looked new, gleaming under the weak warehouse lights. But the air around it was wrong. It didn't have the sterile, plastic smell of new medical equipment. It smelled faintly of cheap spray paint and the sweet, cloying odor of machine oil. On the side of the unit, I saw at a tiny seam where a new plate had been welded on, the paint just a shade brighter than the rest of the casing. This was the nest. This was where the swap happened. I put the box of valves down next to the crate. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. From my pocket, I took the thick black marker I'd brought. My hand was steady, on the cool metal side of one of the new valves, in a place that wouldn't be immediately obvious. I drew a single, small character. Sleep. The signal was sent. The sleeping sharks are here. The swap is confirmed. I turned and walked out of the warehouse, leaving the word behind me in the darkness, a silent testament to the truth. The moment I was clear of Hallow Pier, I pulled into the unlit parking lot of a closed-down diner, the cracked plastic face of its smiling mascot, a ghostly sentinel in the dark. My hands were still shaking from the encounter at Yard 9, from the quiet, terrifying efficiency of Evan Rook. I took a steadying breath, the air tasting of cold metal and fear, and sent the text. The sleeping shark has the sleep stamp. The reply was instantaneous, a single word, acknowledged. The next meeting was in the back of a refrigerated meat truck in the Fulton Market District. The chill in the air, a familiar partner to the cold dread coiling in my gut. This time it was just Silas and Patch. The schematic of the port was gone, replaced by a complex flowchart on Patch's laptop screen. This was no longer about finding the problem. It was about orchestrating the solution. "Barraza is overconfident," Silas began, his voice a low hum that didn't carry past the truck's insulated walls. "He believes his pidgin dialect makes him a ghost. We're going to use that ghost to haunt him." He outlined what he called Plan B. It wasn't a backup. It was the primary assault. "The MVPC is a blunt instrument," he explained. "A full raid on Warehouse 47 is too messy. They'll contaminate the evidence. And Barraza will have time to bury the trail. So, we don't give them the whole meal. We give them a single appetizer." Patch pointed to a name on his screen, Rhea Dax, independent journalist for the Riverline Tribune. She's hungry, smart, and has a source inside the MVPC's clerical department. We're going to feed her source an anonymous tip. "The tip," Silas continued, "will be about a single crate of legitimate, high-grade oxygen compressors scheduled for delivery out of Warehouse 47, a crate that doesn't exist. When the MVPC moves in to intercept it, they will accidentally stumble upon one of Barraza's tampered units, a single faulty compressor. It's a small fire, but we're going to give it all the oxygen it needs to become an inferno." The complexity of it was dizzying. It was a multi-layered deception designed not just to expose Barraza, but to control the narrative from the very beginning. While the MVPC was chasing the bait, Silas would be making another move. "I have a back channel to the City Integrity Unit," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "They're political animals. They care about optics and high-profile wins. I'm going to offer them a deal. We provide them with the technical data from your lab anonymized, of course, proving the equipment is faulty. We give them the voice memo. We give them Barraza on a silver platter. They get to be the heroes who broke the case. In return..." He paused. "They will never hear the name Mai Luong, your file, your visa application. It becomes untouchable." It was a staggering display of underworld diplomacy. He was leveraging one corrupt system against another, with me as the protected prize. "To ensure Barraza doesn't know where the leak came from," Patch added, his fingers flying across the keyboard, "I'll be feeding disinformation into the Longshoreman scheduling network. A fake transfer manifest, a ghost shipment scheduled right during the MVPC shift change. When the raid happens, Barraza's people will assume the leak came from the night crew, from the inside. They'll start a witch hunt, and he'll be too busy cleaning his own house to see the real threat." The plan was brilliant, terrifying, and it was already in motion. But as I left the market district, a heavier, more personal weight settled on me. The next day, I had my weekly volunteer shift at the community church where I used to teach my ESL class. Father Ann, a kind man with worry etched into the lines around his eyes, pulled me aside after the service. "The community is worried," he said, his voice low. "Mrs. Nguyen's husband, his emphysema is bad. The clinic he goes to, their oxygen machine has been unreliable. They say he's had 2 episodes this week. People are scared. They're telling them it's a supply chain issue, but..." He trailed off, his gaze searching mine. I felt a hot, helpless anger rise in my throat. This wasn't a flowchart on a laptop anymore. It was Mr. Nguyen, who always brought me a sweet bun from the bakery. It was the families I taught, the people whose struggles I knew intimately. This plan, our plan, had to work, and it had to be fast. I was shelving books in the church's small library when I saw him, Silas, and he was standing by the entrance, dressed not in his usual tailored overcoat, but in a simple dark sweater and slacks. He looked utterly out of place, a wolf in a sheepfold. He spoke briefly with Father Ann, then placed a thick manila envelope on the welcome desk before turning and leaving as silently as he had appeared. Curiosity overriding caution, I walked over after he was gone. Father Ann was staring at the envelope, his eyes wide. I peeked over his shoulder. Inside was a cashier's check for an amount that made me gasp, and a simple, typed note for the expansion of the language program, to give a voice to those who are not being heard. There was no name, no signature. It was an anonymous gift from a ghost. I looked out the door, but the street was empty. I didn't say a word. I just felt a strange, unsettling warmth spread through my chest. The first spark of the fire was lit that afternoon. A woman approached me as I was leaving the church. She was sharp, with intelligent eyes and a reporter's impatient energy. "Mai Luong, my name is Ria Dax." My blood ran cold. She wasn't supposed to know my name. "I think you have the wrong person." "My source gave me a file number," she said, undeterred. "I backtraced it. Your signature was on the receiving manifest. I'm not here to expose you. I'm here because you're the only one who can tell me what's really happening at those docks." Silas's machine was already moving, but I was still at its center. "I can't talk to you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But if you're going to write this story, you have to promise me something. This isn't about one community. This isn't a Vietnamese crime story. The people who talk like me, the people from the ports, they are the victims here, not the criminals. You protect them. You keep me anonymous, or you get nothing." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Deal." Barraza's response was swift and brutal. By the next morning, he had launched his counterattack. It was a grainy video, circulated on local social media channels. It was the security footage from the Aldora yard, showing me, in my high-visibility vest, talking to old fish. The audio was manipulated, my accent amplified, my words clipped and rearranged to sound sinister and foreign. The caption read, "Foreign operative infiltrates docks to sabotage American businesses. Is this who's destroying our economy?" The humiliation was a physical blow. They had taken my voice, the very thing I was so self-conscious of, and twisted it into a weapon against me. But Silas's counter was already prepared. That afternoon, 2 large trucks bearing the logo of a legitimate medical supply company one Silas apparently controlled pulled up in front of the 16th District Community Clinic. The same clinic Father Ann had mentioned. Silas was there, along with Rhea Dax and a crew from a local news station. He didn't give a speech. He simply opened the doors of the trucks, revealing brand new, top-of-the-line oxygen compressors. "This is a temporary donation," he told the cameras, his voice calm and authoritative, "to address the immediate needs of this community while the city investigates the reports of faulty equipment." He then produced a document, a technical analysis report from Orleans Laboratory, detailing the precise pressure failures and oxygen impurity levels found in a sample unit. At the bottom was a scientific attestation. My signature. I hadn't been named, but I had provided the proof. He had weaponized my science, my truth, against their lies. The story exploded. The MVPC, pressured by the public outcry, launched their raid on Warehouse 47 that evening. As planned, they found a single faulty unit. Rhea Dax's article, citing the anonymous lab report and the accidental discovery, went viral. The Bureau of Proscribed Commerce, facing a public relations nightmare, had no choice but to announce a full, interagency investigation into medical device fraud at the ports. The bait had been taken. I allowed myself a single, fleeting moment of relief. It felt like we had won. The relief was shattered by a phone call from my new lawyer, Mr. Astor. His voice was strained. There's a problem, a big one. A federal judge has just issued a series of warrants. They're not for Barraza's warehouses." "Who are they for?" I asked, my heart sinking. "They're for every known asset and property of the Arguello organization," he said. "The judge is citing potential evidence tampering in an ongoing federal investigation. They're freezing him, cutting him off at the knees. The judge's name is Harrison Pike." The name hit me like a physical blow. Pike, as in Astor and Pike, the firm Silas had hired to protect me. I found Silas in a darkened office overlooking the city. He was staring out at the skyline, a copy of the warrant on the desk beside him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't panicked. He was perfectly, unnervingly calm. "Astor's partner is the judge's cousin, Ina," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "The shield you gave me. It was a listening post. They were watching you through me." He turned from the window, his face unreadable in the shadows. "Pike is on Barraza's payroll, and he was always the fail-safe. Barraza gets cornered. Pike steps in and turns the legal system against me. He's baiting me, trying to force me to make a mistake, to reveal my hand." He picked up the warrant, holding the paper as if it were meaningless. A slow, cold smile touched his lips. "Good," he said, the word a blade in the quiet room. "Tonight we'll put a different head in the noose Barraza's." The world outside had dissolved into a maelstrom of wind and snow. The chaos of Judge Pike's warrant, of Barraza's unseen network, felt both a million miles away and pressing against the frosted glass of Locke and Page, the community bookstore. My small sanctuary of quiet and order had lost power an hour ago. Now, it was just me, a single emergency flashlight, and the lonely sound of the blizzard trying to tear the city apart. I was supposed to be sorting donations, but instead, I sat huddled in a nest of blankets on the reading rug, too exhausted to move, too wired to sleep. Every creak of the old building was the sound of footsteps. Every howl of the wind was a siren. A soft, rhythmic tapping on the glass door cut through the storm's noise. My heart leaped into my throat. I grabbed the heaviest book I could find, a dense historical atlas, and crept toward the entrance. Through the swirling snow, I could make out a dark, familiar shape. Silas. I fumbled with the locks and pulled the heavy door open, letting in a blast of Arctic air. He stepped inside, shaking the snow from his overcoat, his presence instantly shrinking the cavernous, dark space. He wasn't carrying a weapon. In one hand, he held a powerful, heavy-duty flashlight. In the other, a brown paper bag that smelled heavenly of fresh, hot bread and a small, portable electric heater. "The grid is down in this sector," he said, his voice a low, calm anchor in the storm. "I thought you might be cold." He didn't wait for a reply. He scanned the room, found a clear, safe spot on the hardwood floor, far from any books or rugs, and set down the heater. I watched as he checked the safety sensor on the bottom, making sure the automatic shut-off was functional before he plugged it into a portable power bank he produced from his pocket. It was a small, meticulous action, a moment of quiet, practical care that struck me more profoundly than any grand gesture could have. It was the move of a strategist, a man who assessed risk, but this time the risk was my safety, my comfort. He clicked on his flashlight, placing it on a high shelf so it cast a wide, indirect golden glow over our small corner of the room. The light softened the hard angles of his face, warming the dark intensity in his eyes. He turned to me, and in the quiet, insulated world he had just created, we simply looked at each other. The cold, or maybe the adrenaline, had finally caught up to me. A tremor started in my hands, a fine, uncontrollable shaking. I tried to hide them in the folds of my blanket, but he saw. He took a step closer, his gaze dropping to my hands and then rising back to my eyes. He lifted his own hand slowly, as if not to startle a wild animal. He didn't touch me. He just held it there, palm slightly upturned, an offering in the space between us. He waited for my answer, a silent question hanging in the cold air. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. His fingers, warm and firm, closed gently around mine. He didn't pull me closer or make any other move. He just held my hand, his thumb stroking softly over my trembling knuckles until the shaking began to subside, his warmth seeping into my frozen skin. We sank down onto the thick wool rug, our coats still on, the little heater beginning to cast a welcome wave of warmth toward us. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the whisper of the heater and the muffled rage of the storm outside. He never let go of my hand. "Is this okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at our joined hands, then up at his face. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about him as a mob boss, or a savior, or a threat. I was seeing the man who spoke my mother tongue perfectly, who brought me a heater and warm bread in a blizzard. I leaned in, took his hand and gently guided it to my chest, placing it over my heart. I wanted him to feel its frantic, unsteady rhythm, to understand the effect he had on me without me having to find the words. His eyes darkened with an emotion I couldn't name. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to my lips. There was no urgency, no demand. It was a slow, unhurried exploration, giving me every opportunity to turn away. I met him halfway. The first touch of his lips was tentative, soft, and incredibly warm. It tasted of the cold night air and tasted of the cinnamon I always smelled on his coat, a scent I now realized was uniquely his. The kiss was a conversation, a question and an answer. His hand moved from my heart to gently cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. My own hand came up to rest on his shoulder, the thick wool of his sweater a solid, reassuring anchor. He paused, pulling back just enough to look at me, his breath warm on my face. I gave that same small nod, and this time, I was the one who closed the small distance between us, deepening the kiss. It wasn't a kiss of wild passion, but of profound discovery. It was the feeling of finding shelter. Our shoulders relaxed, our breathing synchronized. His other hand found its way to my waist, his fingers splaying across my back, not pulling me closer, but just holding me, a silent promise of support. The world outside, with its federal judges and its assassins, faded into a meaningless, distant roar, the frosted glass of the storefront window, with the world outside reduced to a blur, seemed a fitting backdrop. When we finally broke apart, we rested our foreheads together, breathing in the shared air. In the warm, golden gloom, we began to talk. Not about the case, not about Barraza or Pike, but about things that felt far more dangerous. He told me about his childhood, about growing up in a world where silence was survival, where listening was a more valuable skill than speaking. It was then I realized that in all our interactions, he had listened to me more than anyone had since I'd arrived in this country. He hadn't just heard the words, he'd heard the melody, the rhythm, the unspoken fears behind them. "What are you most afraid of?" I asked, the question feeling impossibly bold. He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "It's not bullets," he said, his voice raw with an honesty that startled me. "It's not prison. It's the thought of your true voice, the one that's sharp and certain and right being lost because this world forced you into silence." Tears pricked my eyes. He saw me. He saw the very thing that had been used as a weapon against me and called it my strength. "I haven't let anyone get this close," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "Not since I came to America. It's always felt too risky." He understood. He knew what it was to build walls. "We need a rule," he said, his tone shifting, becoming practical again, but with a new layer of intimacy. "A signal. If you ever need me to stop, for any reason, no questions asked." He gently took my hand. "Just do this." He tapped two of his fingers against his own wrist. "Touch my wrist with 2 fingers. I'll stop. Immediately." A small, watery smile touched my lips. It was a contract, a piece of their world of silent signals and unspoken rules repurposed for us. It was the most romantic thing he could have possibly said. I brought my fingers to his wrist, letting them rest there for a second. He instantly went still, his hand loosening its grip on mine, honoring the signal even in practice. We both smiled. We had an agreement. When it was time for him to leave, the storm had begun to calm. He walked me to the small back room where I sometimes stayed overnight when volunteering late. He took the blanket from the rug and draped it over me, tucking it in around my shoulders. He zipped up the front of my jacket, his knuckles brushing my chin, a touch as gentle as a whisper. As he turned to go, he paused, then stepped behind me, wrapping his arms around me in a hug that was warm and solid and safe. It lasted a single heartbeat longer than was necessary, a silent punctuation mark at the end of our unwritten conversation. He left as he arrived, a ghost disappearing back into the snow. I stood in the doorway and watched him go. Outside, the wind had piled a drift of snow against a metal sign at the edge of the bookstore's property. The sign read, "Quiet, please." But inside the silent, darkened bookstore, I no longer felt silenced. We had found a language that needed no translation. The quiet intimacy of the bookstore felt like a dream from another life. The blizzard had passed, leaving Chicago encased in a sharp, glittering ice. The new world was one of high-stakes strategy, whispered codes, and the constant thrum of adrenaline. The call came at 1:47 in the morning, jarring me from a light, restless sleep in the safe house. It was Silas. The warmth from the bookstore was gone, replaced by the ice-cold precision of the strategist. "So, Patch has him," he said, his voice flat and fast. "Barraza is liquidating. He thinks Pike's warrant gives him cover. He's moving the entire stock of tampered compressors tonight. Gaslight Waste Pier, 2:17 a.m. "The warrants," I said, my mind racing. "Your warehouses are frozen. He's expecting me to be defending my property. He won't be expecting me to be on his—" The line was quiet for a beat. "I need you." The rendezvous point was under a concrete overpass, the air thick with the smell of frozen diesel. Evan was a silent statue by the black sedan. Patch was a digital ghost, piped into our earpieces from a mobile command unit miles away. Silas was already dressed in dark, functional gear, a stark contrast to the man who had brought me hot bread. "Barraza is spooked," Silas briefed me, his eyes scanning the empty street. "He's using a skeleton crew, non-union, almost all from the Gulf communities, but the Pier's charter requires a certified union spotter for any hazardous waste transfer after midnight. That spotter," he said, handing me a laminated ID card and a hard hat. "Called in sick 12 minutes ago. Patch arranged it. You," he said, "are his replacement, Lin Nguyen, hazmat certified." He handed me a thick, flannel-lined work shirt. "Put this on. The top button is a wide-spectrum microphone. Patch is listening. Evan will be on the water, blocking the canal exit. I'll be observation, on foot. Your job is simple. Get in. Use this." He handed me a digital clipboard. "And document, watch. Listen, that is all. You do not engage. You do not intervene. You are a ghost." I pulled the rough shirt on over my thermal. As I fumbled with the top button, the microphone, my fingers felt clumsy. Silas's eyes met mine in the dark, the memory of the bookstore, of his hand on my heart, hung in the air between us. He didn't say, "Be careful." He didn't have to. His gaze was a physical weight, a shield I could almost feel. Gaslight Waste Pier was a graveyard of rusted metal and forgotten industry. Dim yellow floodlights cut weak cones into the darkness, illuminating the icy planks and the sluggish, black water of the canal. I walked in, my hard hat low, my gait hesitant. I was Lien, the nervous, underpaid replacement, annoyed at being called in on the coldest night of the year. The guards at the gate barely looked at my ID. I saw the operation immediately, a rusty, coastal freighter. The Buena Suerte was moored to the dock. A crane was actively loading pallets of the O2 relief crates from a flatbed truck into its hold. I kept my head down, pretending to check manifests on my digital clipboard, and moved closer. The crew was exactly as Silas had predicted, a small group of men, speaking the rough, coastal pidgin that was now as familiar to me as a threat. The man directing the crane, a heavy-set captain in a worn parka, was shouting at a deckhand. This had to be Captain Howe. "Hurry!" Howe yelled, his voice a gravelly bark that cut through the noise of the crane. "These sleeping sharks have to be at St. Bright's before dawn. Get them loaded." St. Bright's. My stomach clenched. Not a warehouse. Not a distributor. St. Bright's Temporary Clinic. It was a charity, set up in a converted church to handle the overflow of patients from the city's struggling hospitals. He wasn't just hiding the equipment, he was using a building full of the sick and the dying as a human shield. The sheer, cold-blooded cynicism of it made me nauseous. My eyes scanned the dock. I saw them. 2 men, standing near the gangplank. They weren't in work gear. They wore dark, tactical jackets, their hands in their pockets, their eyes constantly moving. They were Barraza's security. They were IRC. My hand moved, a tremor of pure instinct, and I brushed my left sleeve, as if checking my watch. "Seen?" Patch's voice was a whisper of static in my ear. I continued my inspection, moving past the loading area toward a stack of pallets that were next in line. I needed to get closer, to confirm the markings. That's when I smelled it. Beneath the scent of diesel and frozen river water, there was a sharp, chemical odor and a sound, a high, thin whistling. I pinpointed it. A pallet of compressed oxygen valves, separate from the compressors, was sitting near the crane's generator. 2 of the valves were leaking, venting pure, pressurized oxygen into the air. The hissing was quiet, but deadly. They were creating a localized, oxygen-rich environment. One spark from the generator, from a boot nail on the steel deck, from a static discharge, and this entire pier would become a bomb. Silas's words echoed in my head, "Do not intervene." But Mr. Nguyen's face flashed in my memory. The families at the church, the sick at St. Bright's. If this pier exploded, the evidence would be gone. The crew would be dead, and Barraza would win. I dropped my clipboard. It clattered loudly on the metal decking. "Oh, no," I yelped, pitching my voice high with my Lian accent. "So stupid. I'm sorry." The guards glanced at me, annoyed, then dismissed me. I bent down as if to retrieve my scattered papers. My back was to the guards, my body shielding my actions. In my pocket was the multi-tool I had started carrying, a relic of my lab days. My fingers, practiced and nimble from years of handling delicate equipment, pulled it free. I opened the pliers. It was crude, but it would work. I grabbed 2 loose scraps of heavy-duty shipping wire from the ground. In one swift, agonizingly precise motion, I clamped the wire around the base of the first leaking nozzle and twisted. The hissing sputtered. I did the same to the second. The sound stopped. Patch's voice was sharp in my ear. My thermal feed just lit up from your position. The pressure signature. It's gone. What did you do? I didn't answer. I gathered my papers, my heart hammering so hard I thought the microphone would pick it up. And then the world lit up. A high-pitched whine descended from the sky. A brilliant, blinding spotlight snapped on, pinning me in its glare. A drone. It hung 20 feet above my head like a mechanical vulture. Freeze right there, hands where I can see them. A team of 6 men burst from the shadows behind the flatbed truck. They wore black uniforms with IRC patches. They weren't here to fight, they were here to perform. One held a professional news camera, its red light already on. "We have her," the leader shouted, pointing directly at me. He was playing to the camera. "We've caught the foreign agent. She's here sabotaging the medical supply chain. We have you on film. Corporate espionage." It was Pike's trap. It was never about stopping the shipment. It was about me. They were going to broadcast my arrest, paint me as an immigrant saboteur, discrediting me, my testimony, and any link to Arguello. The camera lens was inches from my face. I was completely, utterly blinded. "You're live streaming the wrong crime, gentlemen." Silas, he hadn't come from the shadows. He had stepped out of them, as if he were made of the same substance. He was standing at the edge of the spotlight, his face a calm, cold mask. The IRC leader spun, his face a mask of triumph. "Arguello, we knew you'd show your face." "Now, Evan," Silas said, his voice almost conversational. A loud click echoed across the pier, followed by a wave of white noise static that blasted my eardrum. The drone's spotlight sputtered and died. The cameraman yelled, "What the hell, signal is gone, we're dark, all feeds are dead." "It's a licensed BPC frequency jammer," Silas said into the sudden, confusing darkness. His voice was the only clear sound. "We have a permit for electronic counter-surveillance. You, however, do not have a permit to be on this pier." In the ensuing panic, I heard what mattered most, the roar of a heavy diesel engine. Captain Howe was making a run for it. The Buena Suerte was pulling away from the dock. "Evan," Silas snapped into his own mic, "he's yours." From the darkness of the canal, a second spotlight, low and powerful, snapped on, illuminating the fleeing freighter. Evan's low-profile interceptor boat roared to life, a sleek black shark cutting through the water. The chase was on. Silas grabbed my arm. His grip was like steel. "This way!" And he didn't run. He moved, pulling me with him, a fluid, unstoppable force, weaving through the maze of containers toward the land-side fence. Our exit was a narrow, elevated steel catwalk that ran between 2 warehouse roofs. "Up, us!" he commanded. We scrambled up the ladder, our boots ringing on the metal. We were halfway across, exposed, the wind tearing at us. "Stop!" A man, one of Barraza's crew who hadn't fled, was at the other end. He didn't have a gun. He had a heavy-wheeled metal toolbox. With a roar, he shoved it. It careened wildly down the icy catwalk. A 200-pound metal battering ram, aimed directly at me. I tried to dodge, but my foot slipped on a patch of ice. I went down hard, my hands scraping against the frozen grate. I had nowhere to go. In a fraction of a second, Silas was there. When he didn't push me out of the way, he covered me. His body became a shield. There was a sickening, wet thud of metal impacting flesh and bone. The toolbox smashed into his shoulder and back, the force of it knocking the wind from both of us. He took the entire impact. The caddy teetered and toppled over the side, crashing to the pavement 30 feet below. Silas grunted, a sharp, choked-off sound of pure pain, but he didn't move for a long second, his weight pinning me, protecting me. "Are you hit?" he rasped, his voice tight. "No," I whispered, my voice shaking. You're hurt." "It's nothing." He rolled off me, pushing himself to his feet. He was favoring his left arm, his shoulder clearly injured, but his focus was absolute. "Move." We made it to the street. The black sedan was there, its engine a low, silent rumble. We fell into the back. Silas was breathing heavily, his face pale, a dark stain spreading on his shirt. "Patch," he said, his voice strained as the car sped away. "Send the package to Dax." He had never planned to stop the shipment. He had planned to document its failure. The package for Rhea Dax was already prepped my scientific analysis of the faulty valves and a single, high-definition photograph. It was taken from a camera Patch had planted inside warehouse 47, and it showed the empty, hollowed-out interior of a sleeping shark compressor, its vital components stripped away, the irrefutable proof. We were in a new safe house, a sterile, high-rise apartment. I was holding a bag of ice to Silas's shoulder, my hands trembling. He had his eyes closed, the pain etched on his face. My encrypted phone, the one he had given me, buzzed on the table. A text message from an unknown number, a number that shouldn't exist in its contacts, a number that shouldn't have been able to get through. "Don't trust Arguello. He's using you. The court will crush you. He'll trade you for his own immunity." My blood ran cold. I scrolled down. Signed, H. Pike. The text message from Judge Pike was a violation, a digital serpent sliding into the sterile safety of the high-rise apartment. It lay on the screen of my burner phone, a cold, precise threat that bypassed all of Patch's firewalls. I looked across the room at Silas. He was sitting in a low chair, his back to the window, the city lights painting a cold, distant glitter on the floor. He had his eyes closed, his face pale and tight with pain. The dark, spreading stain on his shirt was a stark reminder of the metal toolbox, of the weight he had taken for me. My anger at Pike was so potent it was acidic, a stark contrast to the wave of protective, confused warmth I felt as I reapplied the ice pack to his shoulder. He opened his eyes as I approached, his focus absolute despite the pain. "They're squeezing," he said, his voice a low rasp. "He's trying to separate me from you," I whispered, showing him the phone. "Don't trust Arguello. The court will crush you." "He's not wrong about the court," Silas said, ignoring the rest. "He's just wrong about who's holding the hammer." The trap snapped shut the next morning. It didn't come as a polite email. It came as a federal summons, delivered by a humorless marshal, ordering my immediate appearance at the Everett Emmetier Dirksen courthouse. The charge: obstruction of federal commerce and conspiracy to interfere with a federal investigation. The first call I made was to Mr. Astor, the high-powered lawyer from Astor and Pike, the shield Silas had provided. His voice, once so reassuring, was now clipped and cold. "I'm sorry, Miss Luong. A severe conflict of interest has arisen. Our firm can no longer represent you, effective immediately." "Conflict of interest," I repeated, my voice hollow. "Judge Pike. He's your partner's cousin, isn't he?" The line went silent for a moment. "You're a very smart young woman," he said. "I truly hope you find adequate counsel." He hung up. The betrayal was so complete it left me breathless. I was a pawn, and I had just been sacrificed. I looked at Silas. He was already on his own phone, his face grim. "He's not the right lawyer anyway," Silas said, his thumb working the screen. "Astor knows how to move money. He doesn't know how to fight a war." He made the call on speaker. "Nova, it's time." A new voice, sharp, clear, and all-female, crackled to life. "I was wondering when you'd call. I've been reading Dax's articles. You're playing a loud game, Silas. I need you at the Dirksen building. 30 minutes, my associate is the target. Harrison Pike is presiding." There was a low whistle on the other end. "Pike, you're not aiming low, are you? What's the objective?" Silas looked directly at me. His gaze was unwavering, his jaw set. "Her reputation is not your concern. My reputation is not your concern. Her voice is, protect her voice." "Got it," Nova Chen said. "I'll be the one in the red blazer. Tell your girl to stay strong. Pike hates a witness who cries." The federal courtroom was a cathedral of intimidation. Dark wood, soaring ceilings, and the suffocating smell of old paper, floor wax, and arrogance. It was designed to make you feel small. Judge Harrison Pike sat elevated above us all, a black-robed god looking down on his insects. His eyes, when they landed on me, were cold with a reptilian lack of empathy. Nova Chen was a force field. She was a compact woman with a razor-sharp haircut and an energy that vibrated. She had met me on the steps, taken my arm, and hadn't stopped talking, feeding me confidence, procedure, and strength in equal measure. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "the government will show that Miss Mai Luong deliberately infiltrated a restricted commercial zone for the purpose of industrial sabotage. It was a nightmare of half-truths and inverted logic. They painted my actions at the pier as a deliberate attempt to cause an explosion, linking it to the smear campaign Barraza had started. They were trying to frame me as a terrorist." When it was my turn, Pike leaned forward, a thin, cruel smile playing on his lips. "Miss Luong, do you understand the gravity of these proceedings? Can you follow the federal code in that language?" The courtroom went utterly silent. It was the parking lot. It was the Aldora yard. It was every person who had ever made me feel small, stupid, or other, all rolled into one man with the power to destroy my life. The old, familiar shame rose, hot and stinging. But then I saw Silas's face in my mind, heard his voice. "You're not weak." I thought of the men on the pier I had saved. I thought of Mr. Nguyen. I stood up straight, my hands clasped behind my back so no one could see them tremble. I looked directly at the judge. "I will answer in my English. Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and carrying to the back wall, "not in your contempt." A collective gasp went through the gallery. Rhea Dax, sitting in the press row, scribbled frantically. Pike's face turned a deep, blotchy red. Beside me, Nova Chen permitted herself the smallest, most predatory smile. "Your Honor," Nova said, rising smoothly, "my client did not obstruct commerce. She prevented a multi-casualty event." She unrolled a large diagram and placed it on an easel. It was the schematic I had drawn for Silas in the safe house, detailing the pier, the generator, the leaking valves, and the blast radius I had calculated. "This is not a guess. Your Honor, this is a blast yield and pressure tolerance map, drawn from memory by my client, who is a trained lab technician with a degree in chemistry. She didn't interfere. She performed a heroic emergency containment." The next blow came from an unexpected ally, the attorney for the Bureau of Proscribed Commerce, looking deeply uncomfortable, stood, "Your Honor, in light of this new information, the BPC wishes to submit new evidence." He held up a digital audio device. "We have analyzed the voice memo provided by Miss Luong. The term sleeping shark has now been confirmed by our linguistic analysts as port-specific slang for a deliberately sabotaged oxygen compressor." I saw the MVPC commissioner, seated behind the prosecution, put his head in his hands. My broken English, the pigeon they had all ignored, was the very key to the entire case. Pike was losing control. He slammed his gavel. "This is a circus. This evidence is inadmissible. It is fruit of the poisonous tree. It was all gathered by dark, extra-legal sources." He was looking right at me, his eyes promising retribution. "Speaking of dark sources, Your Honor," Nova said, her voice cutting through his tirade. She held up her tablet. "I have just filed a public records declaration. It seems the Pike Foundation for Urban Renewal, a charitable trust of which you are the sole director, has received over $2 million in anonymous donations in the last 6 months." Pike went rigid. "That is irrelevant." "Is it?" Nova continued, her voice resonating with cold fury. because those donations trace back to a blind trust registered in the Cayman Islands. The same blind trust, Your Honor. That is the parent company of Cortez Barraza's Aldora Medical Supply. The room exploded. Reporters were literally scrambling over the benches to get to the aisle. Pike was pale, his gavel banging a frantic, powerless rhythm. A man in a sharp suit stood up in the back row. Your Honor, Robert Vance, City Integrity Unit. In light of this declaration, the CIU is opening a formal investigation into this court and its presiding judge, effective immediately. Pike roared for a recess, his face a mask of pure fury. The marshals cleared the room. I stumbled out into the grand, marble hallway, my legs dissolving beneath me. I was shaking so violently I had to lean against a pillar to breathe. The victory felt like a defeat, like I had survived a car crash. He was there, Silas, standing 20 feet away, honoring the public space, the prying eyes, the cameras. He was a still point in the chaos. Evan Rook, a silent shadow, handed him a bottle of water and a small packet of tissues. Silas walked over, his injured arm held stiffly at his side, and offered them to me. His eyes were not the eyes of a mob boss. They were just proud. "You're not a case, Mai," he said, his voice so low only I could hear it. "You're not a file to be traded. You are the only one in that room who is making them listen." The recess was short. When we were called back in, Pike's face was a terrible, mottled gray. He was a cornered animal. This court finds the defendant, Mai Luong, to be a significant flight risk, given her precarious immigration status and her demonstrated ties to disruptive elements. His eyes were full of venom. "I am ordering her remanded into federal custody immediately, pending a full review." A marshal stepped toward me. I heard the click of the handcuffs. This was it. I had won the battle, but he was going to bury me in a cell. "Your Honor," Nova's voice was like ice. She stepped in front of me, handing a single blue-backed document to the stunned marshal. "That will not be necessary. This is an emergency stay and a writ of protection from the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, invalidating your order on the grounds of demonstrated judicial prejudice and conflict of interest." She had predicted it. Silas had predicted it. While Pike was building my gallows, she had been at a higher court, dismantling it. The marshal looked at the document, looked at Pike, and stepped back. We walked out of the courtroom. We walked right past Harrison Pike, who sat there, powerless, his gavel in his hand, a man already in his grave. The steps of the courthouse were a sea of cameras. Rhea Dax was at the front, her phone held high, her voice ringing out. "This is Mai Luong, the woman whose voice they tried to silence." That voice, that accent, is the reason a federal judge is under investigation and a catastrophe at the docks was averted. My personal phone, buried in my pocket, buzzed over and over. A new hashtag was trending. Her accent saved lives. My eyes searched the crowd, past the lights, to the shadows of the alley across the street. He was there, his collar turned up against the wind, his left arm now cradled in a discreet black sling. Silas wasn't looking at the cameras. He was looking at me, and as I watched, I saw a small, impossibly rare smile touch his lips. My burner phone, the one he gave me, vibrated in my hand. A single text from Patch. "Pike is broken. Barraza is running. He's moving his entire remaining operation. Rails, not water. Astor Ridge Rail Yard. Tonight, this is the endgame." The victory in the courtroom was a public spectacle. But the war room was the hood of Silas's sedan, parked in the frozen, desolate landscape of an industrial park miles away. The only light came from the cold, distant glow of the city and the stark white beam of a flashlight, illuminating a detailed schematic of the Astor Ridge Rail Yard. The ink lines showed a tangled knot of tracks, switching junctions, maintenance sheds, and bridges. It was Barraza's last escape route. Silas's left arm was in a sling now, a dark shape against his even darker jacket. The injury had done nothing to diminish his presence. If anything, it had focused it, stripping away everything but the raw, lethal intensity of a predator. Evan stood at the edge of our small circle of light, a silent monolith. while Patch's voice, a disembodied, staticky presence, came through the burner phone resting on the map. "The cargo is in 3 unmarked freight cars, middle of the train," Patch reported. "It's a standard commercial freight run, passing through Astor Ridge between 0203 and 0211. Barraza's people will be waiting with trucks on the access road just past the bridge. He's bribed the regional dispatcher. The train won't even slow down." "We can't stop the train," Evans said, his voice a low rumble. "Too much collateral damage." "And the MVPC and BPC are still chasing their tails from the last tip," Silas added, his good hand tracing a line on the map. "We need to isolate those 3 cars, get them off the main line without raising an alarm." They discussed explosives, magnetic clamps, a dozen high-risk, high-impact strategies. I listened, my mind racing, the cold air burning my lungs. They were thinking like soldiers, planning a physical assault. But Barraza's greatest defense wasn't his men. It was his camouflage, the same camouflage he had built using the voices of my people. "You're trying to attack the train," I said, my voice cutting through their strategic debate. 3 heads turned to me. "But the weakest point isn't the steel. It's the sound." I pointed to a small box on the schematic labeled Yard Control Tower. "The dispatcher Barraza bribed is miles away, but the local yard uses an internal comm system to manage shunting and track changes. It's an open channel. Who controls it?" "The local yardmaster," Patch's voice crackled. "But he won't be there. The tower is automated after midnight." "But the channel is still live," I insisted, my idea taking shape, wild and terrifying and perfect. "Barraza's men on the ground will be listening for the regional dispatcher, but they're trained to obey local track orders. What if a local order came through? An unexpected one?" "They'd question it," Silas said, his eyes narrowed, studying me. "Not if the voice was right," I countered, my heart beginning to beat faster. "Not if the order was given in the same language they used to hide, the Vam Tui dialect, Old Fish, the men at the pier. They all use the same vocal patterns, the same rhythm. I've been listening to that recording for days. I can do it. I can be the dispatcher." Silence. The only sound was the wind whistling through a nearby chain-link fence. I had just suggested taking control of the entire operation, using nothing but my voice, the very thing I had been taught my whole life to be ashamed of. It was Silas who spoke first. He didn't look at Evan or Patch for confirmation. He looked at me. "What would you say?" "Something simple," I said, the words flowing. "Something that sounds like routine maintenance. There's an inspection line here." I pointed to a sighting on the map. "Track 9. It's fully equipped with BPC-mandated surveillance cameras. Switch to the cold line to test the valves. Switch to the cold line to test the valves. It's a plausible order. They won't have time to question it." Evan looked skeptical, but Silas nodded. A slow, deliberate motion. The trust in his eyes was absolute. "Patch, can you get control of the switching board for Track 9? "Already in," Patch replied, a hint of admiration in his static-laced voice. "Good," Silas said. He looked at me. "A commander handing over the keys to the kingdom. The microphone is yours. Evan, you'll take the perimeter. I'm with her." He folded the map. "Patch, send our friends at the MVPC and BPC an anonymous tip, a big one, about a major contraband shipment at the South Chicago depot. Send them in the wrong direction." The control point was the roof of a derelict maintenance shed overlooking the main track. The wind was a physical force up here, trying to tear us from our perch. Silas gave me a pair of powerful binoculars, his fingers brushing mine in the dark. His touch was a spark of warmth in the freezing night. He stood beside me, a dark, solid presence, his good arm resting on the parapet, watching the tracks. He was my shield, my anchor. At 0202 we saw it, a single bright headlight, a cyclops' eye appearing out of the darkness to the east. The ground began to vibrate, a low, deep thrum that grew into a ground-shaking roar. The train was a monstrous metal serpent, impossibly long, impossibly fast. "It's time," Silas said, his voice calm in my ear. I lifted the comms unit. My hand was steady. My throat was dry. I thought of Mr. Nguyen. I thought of the sneer on Pike's face. I thought of Silas taking the blow from that toolbox for me. I pressed the transmit button. The accent came naturally, a ghost of my grandmother's voice. I roughened the edges, added the clipped, maritime rhythm. Control to freight 774. Switch to the cold line to test the valves. Repeat, divert to track 9 for valve pressure test. For a horrifying second, nothing happened. The train continued to thunder toward us. Then, with a deafening screech of protesting metal, the switch on the tracks ahead of us shifted. The massive locomotive veered off the main line, its cars lurching behind it, and rumbled directly onto the inspection track. It rolled to a perfect, hissing stop directly under the bright, unforgiving lights of the BPC surveillance cameras. Down on the access road, chaos erupted, headlights flashed, car doors slammed. Barraza's men, expecting a smooth pickup, were now faced with a train parked in a government-monitored cage. "The gates," Silas ordered into his mic. "Now, patch." With a clang that echoed across the yard, heavy iron gates descended at both ends of the inspection line, trapping the freight cars. At that exact moment, from the opposite direction, a new constellation of lights appeared, a swarm of red and blue. The MVPC and BPC, having realized their tip was a dud, had been redirected by Patch at the last second. They weren't raiding, they were responding to a train that had illegally stopped in a secured federal inspection zone. They had arrived at the right place, at the right time, for all the wrong reasons. We saw Barraza's car, a black SUV, peel out from the access road, tires screaming, and race toward the Astor Bridge, the only other way out. "Let's go," Silas said. He was already moving. Our vehicle was an ATV, a stripped-down, powerful machine hidden behind the shed. I climbed on behind Silas, my arms wrapping around his solid torso. He didn't flinch, even with his injured shoulder. He gunned the engine, and we shot out into the night, cutting across the frozen, rutted ground, a shortcut straight for the bridge. The wind was a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. I buried my face in his back, the scent of cinnamon and cold leather filling my senses. We hit the ramp to the bridge just as Barraza's SUV skidded onto it. The surface was a sheet of black ice. The SUV fishtailed wildly, the driver fighting for control. Then, from the far end of the bridge, a pair of headlights flared to life. Evan. He had circled around, his sedan now a solid black wall blocking the exit. Barraza's SUV screeched to a halt, trapped. Silas brought the ATV to a stop a few yards away. The confrontation was set. Barraza stepped out of the car, his face a mask of incandescent rage. "Arguello, you're a dead man. Your assets are frozen. You have nothing." Silas dismounted slowly, his movements stiff but deliberate. He walked to the center of the bridge, the wind whipping his coat around him. I stayed by the ATV, my heart pounding. "You used a charity clinic as a human shield. Cortez," Silas said, his voice devoid of all emotion, a flat, chilling statement of fact. "You used sick people as cover." Barraza laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Business is business, and you can't prove a thing. My man Pike has you tied up in so much legal red tape, you'll be dead before you see the inside of a courtroom." He pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket and held it up. "And just in case, I have a little insurance policy, the good judge, discussing exactly how he was going to bury you. This gets me a deal, and you get a life sentence." My mind went into overdrive. The recorder, the confession, an idea, born of desperation and instinct, sparked in my brain. I slid off the ATV, my own burner phone in my hand. I hit the speakerphone icon and called the only other number in its memory. "Patch," I said, my voice loud and clear, carrying on the wind. "Are you listening?" Barraza spun, his eyes locking on me. "What is this?" "Tell him what you have. Mr. Barraza," I said, my voice shaking but loud. "Tell my friend exactly what's on that recorder. I'm sure the CIU would love to hear how you entrapped a federal judge. Maybe they'll give you the deal." He took the bait, his ego, his arrogance. It was all he had left. "I've got him admitting everything," he snarled, taking a step toward me. playing to an audience that was both there and not there. Bribery, obstruction of justice, witness tampering. I own Harrison Pike. And who recorded that for you? I pushed. My IRC crew, he boasted. Pike never saw it coming. It's clean, Patch's voice whispered in my ear. Got it all. Sending to Dax and Vance at the CIU. Live. The trap had sprung. Barraza saw the realization dawn on my face, and he lunged, not at Silas, at me, at the phone. Silas moved, a blur of motion. He threw himself between us, intercepting Barraza's charge with his injured shoulder. The impact sent both men sliding across the treacherous ice. A tangle of limbs and fury. Before Barraza could recover, a shadow descended. Evan was there. One swift, brutal, silent motion, and Barraza was on his face, his arm locked behind his back. The fight was over. The sirens grew closer, then faded as the authorities took Barraza into custody. The bridge was suddenly quiet again, the world reduced to the three of us and the soft, steady fall of snow. Silas walked over to me, his face pale, his breath pluming in the frigid air. He stopped a foot away. A single, perfect snowflake had landed in my hair, just above my temple. He reached out with his good hand, his touch impossibly gentle, and brushed it away. His fingers lingered for a fraction of a second against my skin. Our eyes met, the chaos, the fear, the victory. It all swirled in that one long look, and then, despite the cold, despite the pain I knew he was in, we both started to laugh, a quiet, breathless, incredulous laugh. We had survived. A moment later, Silas's phone buzzed. He looked at the text, and the small, rare warmth on his face vanished, replaced by a familiar, cold intensity. "What is it?" I asked. He looked up from the screen, his eyes meeting mine. "That was Patch. Harrison Pike cleared out his office an hour ago. He told his clerk he was going hunting in Canada." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "It's not over. He's the loose end." 3 months can change the texture of a city. The gray, fear-choked winter had given way to a tentative spring, the ice on the river breaking up into sluggish, shifting plates. Cortez Barraza's empire had crumbled under the weight of federal indictments, and legitimate shipments of oxygen were once again flowing to the community clinics of Lower Calumet. The cloud of suspicion that had hung over the Vietnamese community had lifted, replaced by a quiet, resilient pride. Tonight, that pride was a tangible thing, a warm, bright sound filling the community hall of Father Ann's church. It was a fundraiser, a night of voices, celebrating the neighborhood's recovery. I stood at the podium, the microphone in front of me, looking out at the sea of familiar faces. Mr. Nguyen breathing easily in the front row, Kathy waving from the back, Rhea Dax taking notes with a small, genuine smile. When I spoke, I did so first in Vietnamese, the language of my heart, thanking the elders for their strength. Then I switched to English, the language of my new life, my voice clear and steady, without a trace of the apology it once carried. I spoke of the power of being heard, and the courage it takes to speak your own truth in your own accent. The applause, when it came, was the longest and loudest of the night. It felt like coming home. He was there, of course, not in the crowd, but standing in the shadows of the back hallway, just outside the kitchen doors. Silas. I saw him for only a moment, his left arm no longer in a sling, but still held with a certain stiffness, a permanent reminder of the price he'd paid on that catwalk. He had started letting Evan take nights off, had been seen having lunch in daylight, small, tentative steps out of the world of shadows he commanded. But I knew the ghost of Harrison Pike still haunted him. Every strange car, every unknown number, was a potential threat from the man who had simply vanished. He caught my eye and gave me a single, slow nod of approval before melting back into the darkness. Later that night, I was at Lock and Page, locking up after the last of the volunteers had gone home. The street was quiet, washed in the soft, hazy glow of the streetlights. A black sedan turned the corner. It moved without a sound, a familiar, predatory grace, and glided to a stop directly in front of the bookstore. My hand froze on the key. The tinted rear window slid down. It was Harrison Pike. His face was thinner, his eyes holding a wild, desperate glint, but the arrogance was still there, curdled now into pure venom. "Your voice," he said, his words a venomous hiss. "That ridiculous, broken voice cost me my career, my life." He gestured with a gloved hand to the empty seat beside him. "Get in the car." The scene was a perfect, chilling echo of that first night in the North Line Crown parking lot. The silent car, the lowered window, the commanding finger. But this time, the man giving the order was not a complex, dangerous savior. He was just a villain. And the woman receiving the order was no longer a frightened, helpless victim. I walked to the car, my movements calm and deliberate. I opened the door and got in. I did not look away from his furious gaze. As I settled into the seat, my fingers went to the simple silver chain around my neck, a gift from Silas. I pressed a tiny, hidden stud on the clasp, the microphone. A piece of technology so small it was almost invisible, was now live. "Mister, Arguello is a practical man," Pike sneered as the car pulled away from the curb. "He'll trade you for his own peace. A man like that always cuts his losses." I looked at him, at the self-satisfied smirk on his face, and I felt not fear, but a profound, cold pity. "You're still speaking in contempt, Mr. Pike," I said, my voice even. "You should know by now. It's not a language I respond to." His face tightened. He clearly expected me to beg, to cry. My refusal to play the victim was a deep, personal insult. He drove in a tense, angry silence, and I knew exactly where we were going. The circle had to be closed. We pulled to a stop in the empty, wind-swept parking area of the Halberd Bridge, the same spot Silas had stopped for me on that first snowy night. The city lights glittered on the dark, flowing water below. "This is where your little fairy tale ends," Pike said, getting out of the car. But he was wrong. This was where his ended. High above us, silent and invisible against the night sky, one of Patch's surveillance drones drifted into position. At both ends of the bridge, Evan Rook and a second car quietly blocked the entrance ramps, and in the shadows beneath the bridge's massive steel arches, two unmarked vans from the new, reformed MVPC waited, their engines off. This wasn't a kidnapping, it was an appointment, and I had set the time. Pike strode to the railing, pulling a thick file from his coat. "I have everything here, forged documents, doctored photos enough to tie Arguello to a dozen federal crimes. When I release this, he'll be ruined, and you'll be deported as his accomplice." He was monologuing, playing out his grand finale. I stepped out of the car, my own burner phone in my hand. I didn't look at his fake evidence. I just spoke a series of numbers, clear and calm. "Patch, execute file 774. It was the code for Barraza's rail yard confession. From a hidden speaker on the drone above, Barraza's voice, raw and arrogant, suddenly blasted into the night. "I've got him admitting everything bribery, obstruction of justice. I own Harrison Pike." Pike froze, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. He spun around, looking for the source of the sound, his trap collapsing into a cage around him. And then, just like that first night, he appeared. Silas. He stepped out of the shadows at the far end of the bridge, walking toward us with that same unnerving, silent grace. He wasn't looking at Pike. He was looking at me. He stopped beside his own car, which had been parked there the whole time, and he pointed, not at me, not at Pike. He pointed at the passenger door of his car. The message was as clear as it had been on that first night, but the meaning had changed entirely. It wasn't an order, it was an invitation. Time to go home. Pike understood. He saw the blocked exits. He heard his own damnation playing from the sky. The red and blue lights of the MVPC flashed to life, sealing the trap. With a final, desperate roar of defiance, Pike pulled out a phone, trying to live stream his own political martyrdom, but the signal was already jammed. As the officers moved in, their handcuffs clicking in the cold night air, the media vans that Rhea Dax had waiting just a block away roared onto the scene. I leaned against the cool metal of Silas's car, the adrenaline finally leaving my system, my eyes stinging with tears of pure, unadulterated relief. Silas walked over. Stopping a respectful half-step away, the strategist was gone, the mob boss was gone. In his place was the man who had brought me warm bread in a storm. "Home?" he asked, his voice soft. My apartment was not a palace. It was small and warm and filled with the scent of the mint tea I was brewing. There were no grand declarations, no passionate speeches. He just held me for a long time in the middle of my small kitchen, his arms a safe harbor, his chin resting on the top of my head. The kiss that followed was deep, but gentle, a quiet confirmation of everything that had passed between us. We stood at the counter, our hands intertwined on the worn formica, a silent, everyday promise. The next morning, a new foundation was announced at Father On's church, the Accent Proud Scholarship. Its mission was to provide funding for ESL programs that focused not on erasing accents, but on empowering students with the confidence to speak their truth in their own unique voices. The benefactor was, of course, anonymous. Father Ann asked me to be the program's first coordinator. Today, I'm driving. Silas sits in the passenger seat, his arm resting comfortably on the open window, the city of Chicago reflecting in the glass. As we drive over the Halberd Bridge, I see a new sign has been installed on the lamppost, right where he dropped me off all those months ago. It's a public art project. In bold, clear letters, it reads, "Your language is your strength." We don't have a promise of a life without danger, a world without shadows. We don't have a fairy tale, but we have something better, a promise to always listen. And in the end, that is the foundation of all peace. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm curious, where in the world are you tuning in from? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to connect with you and hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories. Give this video a like and show your support by hitting that hype button to help share it with even more listeners.